As many of you saw in my last couple of videos, I wasn't the biggest fan of Gen 6. I felt like X and Y specifically were a massive misstep, so it's needless to say I wasn't exactly rushing to the store to buy the subject of today's video, Sun and Moon. But after a while my interest was piqued, and much like with a bad X, I just felt the need to keep coming back to the franchise over and over, no matter how many times it disappointed me. So eventually picked up Sun, gave it a go, and I was pleasantly surprised. I wasn't absolutely blown away by any means. I had my fair share of gripes, but there's a surprising amount of life in this game, so I was interested in revisiting it one day. And that day is today, so let's take a look at this game and see if I liked it as much as I did my first time round.
The game opens as all Pokemon games do, with the Regions Professor introducing himself and you picking your gender, but in a bit of a swerve, right after Kukui's introduction, we're treated with an intense cutscene of a girl being chased around some building. Following this, you awaken and find Professor Kukui has paid you a visit, and suggests you come with him to get a Pokemon in the next town over. You take him up on that offer and arrive at Iki Town, where you run into the mysterious girl from before, while looking for the island Kahuna, which is kinda like this region's version of a gym leader. You find out she's carrying a Pokemon in a bag, and end up saving it from a flock of Spearow trying to attack it. But the Pokemon ends up letting off a blast, and destroys the bridge you were both on. However, just in the nick of time, you're saved by the island guardian Tapu Koko. Once safe and sound, the girl introduces herself as Lily, the professor's assistant, and introduces a Pokemon as Nebby the Cosmog.
In my opinion, this is one of the best openings to a Pokemon game ever, especially when you factor in the Tapu Koko scene, because you get to see Pokemon acting like Pokemon and just doing their thing. It's something that was kind of missing from previous entries. It also creates a lot of mystique and intrigue around characters like Lily, as well as the region itself, with all of the mentions of its traditions and stuff of that nature.
After saving Nebby, you run into the Kahuna. His name is Hala, and he's shocked to find out that Tapu Koko revealed himself to such an ordinary looking boy, and went as far as to give you a sparkling stone, which is apparently an important item. He then decides to make you take the Island Challenge, which is similar to the Gym Challenge in other regions, as he deems you worthy of such a task. You then get to pick your starter, and on your way back home, you run into some weirdly chipper character named Hao, who challenges you to a battle.
You later find out he's actually the Kahuna's grandson, which, while adding a nice little layer to his character, doesn't exactly make up for the fact he's an insufferable twat. Hao kinda deals with the same problems characters like you deal with, where he's a combination of a lot of past rivals or past characters, but still ends up being extremely bland and uninteresting. He's arguably one of the worst examples of the friendly rival concept, and while they do try to build on him a little bit throughout the game, it's not enough to make me like him.
You eventually battle him again at some kind of ceremony, and as a reward are given a Z-Ring by the Kahuna, which you fashioned out of the sparkling stone, bestowed upon you by the Guardian. The Z-Ring allows you to use Z-moves, which are powerful moves that can only be used if your Pokemon is holding a Z-Crystal, and has a move of the corresponding type.
As you probably guessed, this is a gimmick of this gen, because we can't have a modern Pokemon game without a gimmick, can we? Although, it's technically the first of few, but I'll get to the rest later on. If you want my opinion on Z-moves, I think they're fine, but what gets to me is the weird dances. I think they're unanimously seen as pretty cringe, and I know that phrase is overused, but goddamn, this is way too childish, even for Pokemon.
After all of the festivities, you end up finding yourself at Kukui's lab, and get given a Rotom Dex to help you find your way around the tropical region of Alola, as well as log as much Pokemon data as you can. With your annoying little Rotom Dex acquired, it's time for you to take on the Island Challenge, and your first stop is his trainer school, which was actually quite surprising my first time playing this game. The trainer schools are usually a footnote at best in most Pokemon games, really only reserved for new players and kids hoping to understand the basics a little better, but here it takes on a much bigger role, which was kinda refreshing. But once you're done at the school, you find yourself exploring Halo City and run into the first trial captain of this game, Lima, who you actually met earlier in the game. Trial captains are kinda like gym leaders on a smaller scale. They usually have some kind of puzzle or task for you to complete before they give you their respective Z-Crystal, which kinda act like this game's version of gym badges. During your conversation with the normal type captain, some thugs show up and try to intimidate you, but Lima ends up giving them the cold shoulder, which agitates them, and you end up having to battle against them alongside Lima. These thugs are Team Skull, the evil team of this game, and they're arguably the best part of this game. They're consistently funny and charming throughout the game, and make for a really nice change to the formula, since they're more of a parody of evil teams than an actual evil team, since no one ever takes them seriously. Once they're taken care of, you actually get to battle Lima himself, and then get to take on his trial, earning yourself your first Z-Crystal. And with your first trial out of the way, you actually get to go back to Iki Town to challenge the fighting type Kahuna Hala, thus completing your first grand trial. As a reward for beating him, he hooks you up with a ride pager, which is a device that allows you to summon certain Pokemon to fulfill tasks for you, such as Lapras for surfing and Charizard for flying. As you probably guessed, after a couple of gens of slowly phasing out HMs, they've finally done away with them completely with mountable Pokemon, which is a concept they experimented with in Gen 6, and I have to say it was a much needed change since HMs got really annoying after a while. But anyway, with 2 Z Crystals under your belt, you get to leave Melee Island and go to Kala Island, the site of your next series of trials. Upon arrival, you meet Mallow, one of the trial captains, as well as Olivia, the island kahuna. After introducing yourself and having Lily open up to you a little more, you run into Dexio and Sinner, who are some weird nobody characters in X and Y, but for some reason they've made a return here and give you a side quest centered around the legendary Pokemon Zygarde. Continuing on your travels, you run into How in Paniola Town, and after a quick battle you head to your next trial, but on the way you see How talking to some blonde kid. You introduce yourself and learn that the edgy kid is called Gladion, and is a part-time Team Skull member. After you beat him, some grunts turn up and belittle him before running off, allowing you to make your way to your next trial. You eventually arrive at Brookett Hill, and after defeating the Totem Wishy-Washy, you get the Waterium Z off of Lana, marking your 3rd Z Crystal. On the way to your next trial, you help some girl named Hapu take out some Team Skull grunts, before arriving at Royal Avenue, where you take part in a Battle Royal, which is basically just a 4-way battle. But with all of that tedium out of the way, you can finally take on Kiawe's trial, and after defeating the Totem Salazzle, the Fire-type captain gives you your 4th Z Crystal. After this, you press on and eventually find yourself in the Lush Jungle, the home of Mallow's trial, and after gathering the items for a stew and defeating her infamous Totem Lurantis, you get the Gracium Z. Once you've completed the trial, Kukui shows up and asks you to meet him at the Dimensional Research Lab. It is here where you meet Professor Burnett, who just happens to be Kukui's wife. Burnett tells us about an interesting phenomenon occurring in the Alola region, the appearance of ultra wormholes. Holes that have been appearing in the sky all over Alola, apparently leading to other dimensions. Supposedly, Pokemon from these different dimensions have been appearing all over the place and had to be fought off by the Island Guardians. After hearing the Professor's theory, you can make your way to Olivia's trial, but on the way you meet the Aether Foundation, who are Pokemon conservationists trying to shoo away Diglett to protect them from trainers. You run into them yet again on the way to your 2nd Grand Trial, and this time they've had their Pokemon stolen by Team Skull, and once you get their Pokemon back, the leader invites you to the headquarters, the Aether Paradise. Regardless, you eventually take out Olivia and earn yourself your 6th Z Crystal, before setting off to meet Faber, the Aether brand chief. He takes you to the Aether Paradise where he's shown around and greeted by the president of the foundation, Lusamine. Despite projecting the image of being this lovely godlike Pokemon preservationist, when an Ultra Beast appears from a wormhole, she expresses a need to have and control said Ultra Beast, suggesting the Aether Foundation might not be all sunshine and rainbows. But with your visit to Aether HQ coming to an end, you set sail for the next island to continue your adventure. You explore the island a little and end up meeting Kukui atop a mountain, where he tells you about his plans to establish a Pokemon League for Alola, much like the ones found in other regions.
This is actually quite a surprising and interesting revelation the first time I played Sun, since the Pokemon League has been a constant in every game since Gen 1. But I suppose Gen 7 broke a lot of conventions. I mean, look at the Island Challenge. The trials are quite a contrast to the gyms of the previous games. Sure, the core concept is sort of the same, but instead of battling a strong trainer at the end, you instead take on a couple puzzles and maybe fight a really strong Pokemon at the end, which was kind of a cool concept. And again, I know the concept is basically the same, but it's fresh enough and new enough to give Alola its own identity and charm.
Speaking of trials, after you part ways with Kukui, you get to take on the Totem Vikavolt and get gifted the Electrium Z by Sophocles. And with your 7th Z Crystal in your possession, you head to Mali City where you find Kukui being harassed by Team Skull, who are accompanied by their leader, Guzma. You assist Kukui by taking out Guzma, and then decide to continue with your travels. On the way to your next trial, you and Hal run into Gladion, who asks you if you know anything about a Pokemon called Cosmog. Hal, being the moron he is, gives away the fact that you do, and Gladion tells you to do whatever you can to keep the Pokemon safe, as Team Skull are looking for it. And with that out of the way, you can finally take on Acerola's Ghost-type trial to earn your 8th Z Crystal, and then head back to the Aether House, which is a small sanctuary Acerola runs. Upon arrival, you learn that while you and Acerola were away on the trial, Team Skull swooped in and stole a Pokemon from the Aether House, so you have to go to their base in Po Town to get it back. After fighting grunt after grunt and solving a small puzzle, you eventually reach Guzma, and after you defeat him, he sets the Pokemon free and flees, allowing you to pick up the Beginnium Z for your troubles. Unfortunately, once you get back, you learn that in an admittedly genius move, Team Skull waited till you left to sneak into the Aether House and kidnap both Lily and Nebby, and have taken them to the Aether Foundation. But before you set off to find them both, you get to fight the Dark-type kahuna of the island, Nanu, a grouchy old man who helped you infiltrate Po Town earlier. With your 3rd Grand Trial complete, you head to the Aether Paradise, and upon arrival are confronted by Faber, but he's easily taken care of. You press on, and as you make your way through the building, you learn more and more about Gladion, like how he once lived here and how his partner Pokemon was created by Aether scientists. You eventually find where Lily is being held, but it's being blocked off by Team Skull and Guzma, who are apparently working with the Foundation, but with some help from Hau and Gladion, they're easily taken care of. Once you reach Lily, you encounter Lusamine alongside her, and it's revealed that Lily, Lusamine and Gladion are all related, which, while not the most shocking revelation ever, it's still a great way to tie the plot into the game's theme, which we'll get to in a minute. Lusamine then opens a portal to Ultra Space using Nebby's powers, and escapes to the dimension alongside Guzma. Immediately after this, we're treated with a scene of Lily, who's completely overhauled her look and attitude literally overnight, that involves Gladion apologising to his sister, and giving us one of 2 flutes required to summon the legendary Pokemon, who can help us save Lusamine and Guzma.
While we're playing this game, I suffered some serious tonal whiplash because of this scene. Lily's mum literally just got swallowed up by a wormhole where she may be stuck for the rest of her life, and all Lily cares about is a new fit. I would have appreciated this scene at any other point in the game, but right after the dramatic scene with the wormhole, really?
Regardless, you make your way to the final island to take on its new kahuna Hapu, meaning you've completed every grand trial. But you can't celebrate just yet, as you and Lily, having found the second flute, now need to summon the legendary Pokemon, and in a pretty neat twist, Cosmog was a legendary Pokemon all along, as it ends up evolving into either Solgaleo or Lunala, depending on which version you're playing. Your new powerful companion opens a portal to Ultra Space, and as you explore you find Guzma, who for the first time in his life is fearing for his life, as well as an even more unhinged Lusamine, who fuses with an Ultra Beast called Neolego and engages you in battle. But instead of fighting you herself, she fights you with a team of Pokemon, which is pretty fucking absurd and hilarious, considering the fact she went through the effort of transforming. Although once defeated, she does actually try to attack you herself, but you're saved by Nebby. And after an emotional scene between a mother and a daughter, you make your way out of Ultra Space and the day is saved. Although your adventure isn't over yet, as you still need to take on the Elite Four, which is comprised of the fighting and rock type kahunas Hala and Olivia, the ghost type captain Acerola, and a new character, the flying type golfer Kahili. And in a pretty fitting turn of events, the makeshift champion is none other than the mastermind behind the Alolan League, Professor Kukui. He's a real tough opponent, especially since he's using the starter that you and Hau didn't pick, which is the one that's strong against your starter. But with him beat, you become Alola's first official champion, and are treated to a cute little celebration in Iki Town. However, the story doesn't end with a completely happy ending, as Lily has decided to leave Alola to go to Kanto to get some help for her mother, as well as start a journey of her own, and with that, the credits roll.
I remember not having the highest hopes for this story my first time round, or when revisiting it for this video, but all things considered, I'd say this is one of the best written stories the main series has to offer. It's not flawless by any means, but a lot of the content here is phenomenal. I'm not going to go over every single detail, but I will cover the major points to explain why this story is so good, so let's start with the characters.
I already expressed my disdain for Hau, but if I'm completely honest, if you really want to, you could justify his annoying character traits in a way. You may be wondering how, no pun intended. Well, if you pay close attention, you realise a lot of the main cast is either tackling some sort of struggle, or are just straight up in a dark place. Take Lily and Gladion for example. They had an abusive, perfectionist mother who suppressed their real personalities, instead making them fit into what she deemed appropriate for them, resulting in one of them lashing out and becoming a criminal, with the other becoming somewhat of an emotional wreck, with seemingly no plans or future. Then you have Kukui and Guzma, both Pokemon trainers who failed at becoming captains, and while Kukui managed to turn things around, becoming a professor and all-around cheery and stand-up guy, Guzma wasn't so lucky, as once his dreams were crushed, he formed Team Skull to prove his strength and worth, a choice that led him to work alongside Lusamine, a choice that very well could have killed him. Speaking of Lusamine, what isn't wrong with her? She's a completely unhinged monster that would give Cyrus a run for his money. Now you may be wondering how that all relates to Hau. Well, with all the conflict and serious undertones to the story, it leads to a somewhat drab feel to the game. However, that is juxtaposed by two main things, one being the vibrant and tropical setting, and the other being your friendly rival Hau. Hau doesn't really deal with much as a character, other than the conflicts that he and either Elio and Celine find themselves in. He doesn't have an inner struggle of any kind or any ongoing conflict to resolve. The closest he gets to having anything bringing him down is the fact that he's in Hala's shadow to a degree, which surprisingly doesn't really seem to faze him. So while I personally don't enjoy his character at all, I can see he's sort of necessary to the story. He's another light-hearted character like Kukui that helps break up all of the serious stuff and make it a little more vibrant.
Oh, on, since we were just talking about Lusamine and a fucked up family, I think it's time I should talk about how they fit into the theme of this game.
The theme of the Alola games is relationships and bonds, things that are constants throughout this game, and there is no stronger example of this theme than this broken family. Driven mad by the disappearance of her husband during a trip where he's researching Ultra Beasts, Lusamine eventually became obsessed with Ultra Beasts after being poisoned by a Neolego while researching them herself to bring her husband back. As a result of this downward spiral, Lusamine became self-serving, only caring about Ultra Beasts, modelling a daughter after the aforementioned Neolego and not allowing her to form her own identity, which led to Lily becoming very withdrawn and frightful, while her brother took a very different path as mentioned before, opting to fend for himself and seek out a way to stop his mother's plans to let Ultra Beasts loose all over Alola.
It's through the plot threads and events that take place before us that we learn the importance of relationships and bonds, because after having their bond with their mother severed, Gladion and Lily become, for lack of a better term, broken. As we get to know him, Gladion reveals he has more of a caring and fun-loving side that he's been covering up with a edgy and hateful front, almost as a self-defense mechanism after being hurt. And to contrast that, we have Lily, who instead recoiled and went into a cocoon, if you will, as a different kind of self-defense mechanism to shield herself from more harm. On top of that, we even get to see both of them flourish due to the relationships and bonds they both built with the player throughout the game.
Gladion, after becoming the player's rival, opens up more and is given hope and is driven to achieve his goals, forming somewhat of a friendship with the player, something he no doubt struggled with after becoming homeless and being on the run for so long. Lily, while initially closed off and reserved, still wearing the clothes and hairstyle her mother chose for her, thanks to the player, eventually achieves the confidence to escape from her aforementioned cocoon and shows off a more joyful and outgoing side that she had been hiding all along, even going as far as to scold her mother for her foolish and selfish actions, something that you would have never expected from the shy and admittedly socially inept girl you met at the start of your adventure. This is an incredible way to tell a story, and for all the flack Game Freak gets from fans like myself during the 3D era, I have to say it was a great story, and bar a few questionable moments, you could argue it was on par with Gen 5's. And I've already talked about how the four main characters fit into the themes of this game. Let's not forget the relationships that characters like Hala and House share, or even Guzma and Kukui for that matter, and not to mention the relationships they share with all the side characters, as well as Lily's family and the player, almost creating a web or network of relationships.
But unfortunately, this is modern Game Freak we're talking about, so as you've guessed, with every success, there's about 10 blunders, the biggest of which being the cutscenes.
Make no mistake, the graphics of this game are incredible if you ask me. They're miles better than Gen 6, especially in the cutscene department, but there are so damn many of them. Every other step you treat to a long and unskippable cutscene. And it drags, especially since it never truly stops. It's like that the whole way through. I understand that to tell this good a story, there had to be a lot of cutscenes and dialogues, similar in fashion to Black and White. But the overabundance of cutscenes and plot can be extremely annoying and turn players off immediately. I know it did for me my first time round, and it wasn't any easier my second time around. And there's so much fluff in terms of exposition and pointless flavor text, it's hard to follow important plot points and threads sometimes, since it's all lost amongst the padding.
Because of the overabundance of cutscenes, I wanted this game to be over badly at multiple points throughout the game, which is never a good thing. Now this could be a product of me being somewhat sick of Pokemon at this point, with this whole year-long review marathon and all, but trust me, if this was the only Pokemon game I'd played this year, I'd still feel this way. If anything, if it wasn't for this review, I probably would have just put the game down. It's truly that bad, especially when it leads to a lot of hand-holdy moments, as if this game needed to be more hand-holdy.
For those unaware, you have a lot of patronising features in the game, like the game telling you the effectiveness of moves, and flags on the bottom screen telling you where to go, and it gets really annoying. Sure, the former can be useful at times, but with the flags in the bottom of the screen, it kills a lot of the immersion. How am I supposed to explore this beautiful region and get invested in it if you're literally telling me where to go all the time? I mean, it's not like I can anyway. Most of the areas that are away from checkpoints are inaccessible. This is truly the most linear main series game. There's barely any form of exploration. But you know what, while we're on the topic of the region, let's hear some positive things about this game. The region is absolutely beautiful if you ask me. It kinda goes without saying that a region based off of Hawaii is beautiful, but I think Game Freak knocked it out of the park with Alola. Sure, there are areas in the region that blend in with others, thus making them forgettable, much like the vaguely tropical yet completely forgettable soundtrack, but as a cohesive massive region, Alola works, even if it's not super flashy. The graphics just pop and make the region come to life, and it's all aided by subtle details like hearing Pokemon cries in the background during cutscenes that take place on routes. And it's complemented by the awesome roster of Pokemon. If you ask me, the Gen 7 Pokemon are some of the best in the series. Sure, you have a couple of duds like Yungoos, Oricorio and Comfey, but most of the roster is made up of incredible and unique Pokemon like Lycanroc, Salazzle, Oranguru, Golisopod, Minio, Turtonator, Mimikyu and Komao. With so many awesome and creative designs, I'm sure any player would have a good time building a team in Gen 7. There's just so much variety on display here. They were feeling so creative, in fact, they went as far as to create new designs for old Pokemon, called regional variants, which is another gimmick of this game. Honestly, I'm kinda mixed on this concept. I kinda wish they'd just move on from these old Pokemon and just create new designs, but I suppose it breathes new life into these tired old Pokemon we've seen a million times before.
This game was a bit of a mixed bag for me. I enjoyed a lot of aspects like the roster and story, but a lot of it was bogged down by constant hand-holding and a lot of start and stop progression. Now this is where the Ultra games come in. I was initially going to give the Ultra games their own video because I thought they were unique enough and different enough to require their own analysis. And truth be told, they still do. The only problem is I didn't get very far with them. I played the intro, but that was about it. I couldn't get any further because for one, I was risking some serious burnout, and two, I just didn't have the time. But they're very important entries that require some sort of acknowledgement at the very least, because much like Auras before them, they take place in a parallel universe of sorts.
What do I mean by that? Well, in this set of games, the story revolves around the third member of the Light Trio, Necrozma, and is set in a parallel universe with a different set of events, and it ruins the story. Now, I haven't played this game for myself, so I may be missing out on some details here, but from what I understand, due to Necrozma's inclusion, a lot of the focus was taken away from Lily and her struggles, not only for the sake of keeping the plot as neat as possible, but also to give Lusamine a more sympathetic role. Why? Lusamine's character was fine as is. Her being a manic bitch was what drove the plot and made it compelling in the first place. Even slightly altering her character and motives could have a massive effect on the plot and characters around her, and evidently it did. Sure, she's still kinda unhinged, but giving her a saviour complex just doesn't work as well. The Aether Foundation was a very important part of the story, because not only were they the true evil team of this game, but they were also layered and fit into the theme of relationships and bonds. They built up positive relationships with Pokemon by saving them from predators and people who use Pokemon for personal gain like Team Skull, which made the twist that the leader is off the wall insane and a shitty parent who enlisted the help of Team Skull of all people for her personal gain really damn effective, even if you saw it coming a mile off. And with the addition of researchers called the Ultra Recon Squad, whose whole purpose was to investigate Ultra Wormholes and stop Necrozma, it just makes Lusamine look even more foolish, because now she's just going against people she was working with, because she believes she's the one for the job when it comes to bringing down Necrozma.
With all of these extra elements mixed in, it detracts from Lily's story, which, if you ask me, was the main focus of Sun and Moon. And it's a real shame, because with all of the shiny new graphical enhancements, new features, and storylines like the Rainbow Rocket episode, this very well could have been the definitive version of the Alola experience. But unfortunately, they decided to visit a parallel universe and tell a completely different story with this entry, which I think greatly backfired. Again, I could be wrong, and I'm willing to admit that my point of view is not very well informed, not having played the game and all. But if you ask me, knowing what I know, I would say it was a misstep. Now, if you were to ask me which version you should play, I'd say both, because in a way, you're missing out if you play one and not the other. But for my money, I'd say go with the originals, and maybe if you enjoyed them enough, pick up the Ultra games if you want to see a bit of a different perspective. While I can't necessarily guarantee you'll love these games, if you're patient enough, I'm sure you could find a lot to enjoy in these games, because I sure did, and I'm cynical as fuck.